Good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us once again. We want to give you an update about where we are and where we are going. To state the obvious, overnight it was bitterly cold across most of Texas, and most of the state will continue to experience sub-freezing temperatures for a few more nights. Tonight it's anticipated that the entire state will be in a freezing or below freezing temperature situation. Importantly, though, the power grid continues to perform well at peak demand during this winter storm. Peak power demand was about 69,000 megawatts earlier this morning. We do not expect demand to exceed that amount for the rest of the storm. Very importantly, at the height of the power generation supply, more than 86,000 megawatts of power was available to serve demand on the grid. That's important because that far exceeds the estimated peak demand during last year's winter storm. ERCOT forecasted that peak demand during Winter Storm Uri was about 77,000 megawatts. That's about 9,000 megawatts less than this year's highest available power supply. The actions taken by the legislature, by the PUC, and by ERCOT have resulted in a stronger grid. The power grid's strength of position is a result of Texas having about 15% more power generation capacity than last year. It's a result of the winterization that protected power generation facilities across the state. It's also a result of the increase in power generators online because of improved maintenance schedules. It's also a result of the availability of alternative fuels for generators to use to generate component was doing their part to get power to homes and to businesses across the state. As I said yesterday, and I can say again today, the Texas electric grid is more reliable and more resilient than it's ever been. Now, I want to go over what ERCOT expects for the power demand and capacity for both today as well as tomorrow. Graph 1 shows, it's the one over here, Graph 1 shows expected power demand for the next 2 days, the power generation capacity that is expected, and a breakdown of the sources of that power, whether it be wind, solar, or thermal. It shows that there is plenty of power expected for both today as well as tomorrow. At the expected peak demand over the next 2 days, there should be about 17,000 megawatts of extra power capacity. That's enough extra power to supply more than 3 million homes across the state. This other graph shows the current demand for power in Texas at this time. The current demand is the bottom line, and then the top line is the current available capacity of power from the grid. The last I saw, it shows that there's about 15,000 megawatts of extra power over current demand, which again is about enough to fuel and power 3 million homes across the state. Also at this time, despite having abundant supply in the power grid in the state of Texas, there remain about 20,000 customers in Texas without power. And like we explained yesterday, the reason for that loss of power is obviously not because the power grid doesn't have the power that's needed. Instead, it's an issue at the local power provider level. Once again, the most probable cause of the lack of power for those customers is either wind knocking down power lines, or more likely, ice weighing down lines, or ice causing problems with trees that either trees or tree limbs would fall on power lines. I even saw one story yesterday where a vehicle ran into a power pole, knocking the power pole down, and knocking that power pole down resulted in a loss of power to an entire region. And what needed to be done was for the utility officials to be able to come out, remove the vehicle that ran into the power pole, erect a new power pole, and get power reinstalled. And so that just takes a while when incidents like this occur during the course of a storm like this. The good news is when we were here with you at this time yesterday, there were about 70,000 Texans without power. And now that number has been reduced to about 20,000 Texans. And that's a result of all these local officials and especially the utility companies working around the clock. I want to express my gratitude for the linemen who have been out in sub-freezing temperatures in ice 24/7, working all night long, all day long, in very inclement weather to make sure they get power restored. Anyone who loses power should call their local power provider. If you need help identifying your local power provider or getting their contact information, go to puc.texas.gov/storm. That's puc.texas.gov/storm. The agencies represented at the table will be telling you about new developments and what they are working on. I do want to emphasize that we still have more than 24 state agencies that are working 24/7 to help Texans be able to deal with and respond to this storm. That includes the Texas Military Department. They have over 125 personnel and 50 vehicles rostered and will continue to add more as needed. In addition to their operations around the state that I told you about yesterday, also yesterday, the Military Department assisted 10 stranded motorists and evacuated 5 personnel and assisted 2 emergency vehicles. They are also adding 5 wreckers to the Kerrville area to assist in the recovery in that area that you will hear more about from 2 other agencies shortly. On the Texas A&M Forest Service, they have been incredibly busy trying to clear ice off of roads to make roads more passable. As a few examples, they bladed about 60 miles of Interstate 20 near Abilene and assisted in that Abilene region can stay operational for 24 hours throughout this winter event. Also, the motor graders assigned to Brownwood are continuously blading a 48-mile stretch of Interstate 20 in both Eastland and Callahan counties. And yesterday, they helped remove 8 semi-trucks that were in a pileup, as well as in doing so,
Thank you, Governor. As you know, the grid was ready for this event. It is performing as expected, and it's more reliable than it has ever been. The historic reforms that we have implemented at the direction of the legislature and the governor mean that we have more power available than before, more backup for generators than before, and more reliability than ever before, especially in severe winter weather events like this. Our operational changes mean that we are operating with a conservative management approach on the grid. We have more power reserves, resulting in a bigger margin of safety, and we're using an abundance of caution by turning on more generators sooner rather than later. Our weatherization requirements mean that our generators meet and exceed federal winterization standards, and we're seeing the benefits of that during this winter storm. We've worked closely with the Railroad Commission to designate critical natural gas infrastructure to ensure gas continues to flow to our generators, and made many other resources available as part of our market reforms. Our generators and poles and wires companies have pre-positioned crews around the state to reduce the number of outages rapidly, as the governor stated.
and we're working to fully address problem spots. We're continuing to deal with, in particular, some heavy areas of icing and really stubborn ice that is due to low temperatures and the ice accumulation that we have had over the past 24 to 48 hours. Our TxDOT crews have been working shifts continuously and assisted, as was noted, by our partner agencies around the state. We greatly do appreciate the assistance that we receive from our other team members. We've had, of our own personnel, about 4,000 TxDOT personnel engaged in about 3,500 pieces of equipment that have been utilized through the course of this event. As I mentioned, icy conditions are still prevalent. Some of the areas that are particular of note are bridges and elevated sections, as well as areas where you may have some steeper grades and there may be some challenges holding traction in those locations. One particular area of note has been I-10 over in Kerr County, where last night we had in the westbound direction a couple of trucks that got engaged into a crash. One of them jackknifed. It took some time to get the equipment out there to clear that crash location. As is typically, unfortunate, the case with these types of incidences, some additional crashes appear to have occurred in locations, and we've been working throughout the night to not only address moving those vehicles and trucks out of the way, but to also get the trucks that had backed up after those incidents to clear and to move out of the roadway. We've made some great progress. We've got a report this morning that at least one lane is open. We've got multiple crews on site being supported by our other agencies, and we expect to
supplies for our warming centers established, and right now over 142 warming centers still open across the state, with 62 still on standby. We've talked a little bit about I-10 in Kerrville, and I talked to the Kerr County Judge, Rob Kelly, and he's moving people off of the roads into the VFW halls and the warming centers there, Governor, so they're taking great care of those folks at the local level until the road gets open. Our winter weather resources can still be found at www.tdem.te on the page. And more for key messaging. While the precipitation has largely left the state, it's still going to be brutally cold out there. And so we really need to continue to focus on the 4 Ps, the people, pets, pipes, and plants. We cannot turn our backs on those that are in need right now. And our goal from here on out is to prevent preventable injuries and deaths. And we do that by not driving if you don't have to. I mean, you just heard Colonel McCraw talk about the injuries and deaths on Texas highways. If we don't have to get out and drive, we can prevent those deaths. The next is we have people that are getting out walking around, and we have trips and falls and people slipping. And I know we have some head injuries in a couple of hospitals right now because of falls. Those are preventable injuries. If you don't have to be outside, do not be outside. And we've got to continue. I need your help pushing this message about protection from carbon monoxide exposure. Do not run a generator in the house. Don't use gas grills inside the house. And so those are preventable injuries and preventable deaths. And then finally, Governor, I want to re-echo so many of the thanks to our line crews that are out there. It is cold. It is brutally cold. The line crews up there working in that wind trying to get our power back. We're thankful. Our TxDOT partners, our first responders, our county roads, our healthcare workers still going to work every day in hospitals. And then finally, I want to thank the working media. You guys are out there driving around. It's cold. Thank you for being here and helping us get our message out.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions. Wes?
Governor, just out of curiosity, how do you feel about those campaigning against last year's grid bill?
You know, our focus here, obviously, is we want to execute at this point in time of implementing all the laws that were passed in a bipartisan way. Both Democrats and Republicans supported the reforms that were passed, reforms that have led to a grid that is far more resilient. And I think it's important for everybody, whether they're involved in politics or not to go around fear-mongering, predicting the worst-case scenario, predicting blackouts and things like that. It's important for the public to be educated like what we're trying to do, to let the public know that the grid is better than it was last year in very tangible ways because of the reforms that were passed. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the grid perform by providing an amount of power that would have been more than enough power that was needed during the time of Winter Storm Uri.
Maggie, go ahead.
This might be a question more for PUC and ERCOT. Could you kind of walk me through how, I guess, why the forecasting changed so much for the beginning of the week was 71, went up to 75 at one point, and then obviously this morning actual demand is at 69. Is that something we need to be working to get more precise ahead of winter weather?
So the forecast changes as we get closer to the operating day for several reasons. First and foremost, any forecast will continue to be refined as information gets better and we get closer to the operating day. In addition to that, we have taken the new position of using the most conservative forecast possible as another margin of safety. We want to prepare for the worst case scenario. In addition to that, this morning in particular, people are staying home from work as we've asked them to. Schools are closed, so those a lot of buildings out there that don't need power this morning, which contributed to the drop.
Let's go to Carr. Kate.
Obviously, you said this was a major icing event, one of the biggest icing events we've seen in decades. But with last year's storm, it was lower temperatures for more days. So can you just review the main things you're doing to make sure that these changes that were made, these positive changes, could last through something like that again? Because I know people still do have anxiety about it.
Sure. I will go through all the changes that were made to make sure that the grid is more resilient. But I first want to point out that the fact that because we have added more power generating capacity, that is what led to the grid this year being able to generate and produce more power than was needed at the height of Winter Storm Uri. That's a result of the state bringing on about 15% more power generation capacity as a result of having more reserve power than we had last year. It's a result of what the PUC chair mentioned about the winterization. 99% of all power generators in the state of Texas are fully winterized and passed inspection for winterization. As a result of that, and as a result of the maintenance operations, we had more power generators online at the beginning of the storm, and more generators continue to operate during the course of the storm. Also, more natural gas facilities are designated as critical infrastructure to ensure ongoing operation during the winter storm. or at least have available, alternative sources of power on site other than, let's say, natural gas. If they were to run out of natural gas or not receive natural gas, they could tap into these alternative sources. Then I'll add this last thing, and that is we have multiple days' worth of natural gas in storage in the event that it would be needed. When you add all that together, as well as some other things, the power grid is more stable, is more resilient, and is better than it's ever been in Texas history.
We have time for two more, Bridget.
Yeah, TxDOT mentioned they're getting some lanes open in Kerrville, all those people, but lots of people been sitting there overnight running out of gas. What's being done to help those people, and when do you expect to keep going?
Sure. I'm going to let both Texas Department of Transportation and Texas Department of Public Safety respond to that.
Well, as the executive director just talked, the lanes are being open right now. One is open on Interstate 10. We'd like no lanes to be closed. And every time a lane is closed and every time there's gridlock, there's more crashes behind that. So the challenge is how can we quickly move those vehicles off the road and continue to get people moving? And of course, in instances like this, when you've got too few wreckers and too many crashes and the conditions are so severe, and it's going to cause backups. There's nothing that can be done with that. I mean, they can de-ice all you want, and TxDOT does a great job before deploying that, but the weather conditions is what we're talking about. And that, unfortunately, when people are on the roadways, you know, in those conditions and they're driving too fast, it just takes one crash to create a series, especially along Interstate 10 and some of those areas like between mile marker 500 and 511.
I'll just add to that as I did note, we've got one lane open in each direction. We've had one lane open off and on throughout the night. The challenge that we've had has been really working around a lot of the trucks that quite frankly shut down, and our personnel and sometimes law enforcement personnel having to bang on their door and wake the drivers up and to get them to move their vehicles. We've been doing that throughout the night, and as I mentioned, we've got one lane open. We expect to have both lanes open in each direction, but conditions, and it's really important, as the Colonel mentioned, to let motorists know that conditions are still going to be dangerous and hazardous, particularly overnight. And when we have this refreezing, the ice is very stubborn. We have slick spots that we try to work around, and it only really takes one of those to create a very serious crash and a very serious backup. But we've got a lot of personnel on site, and they're working to assist motorists that need help and to get traffic moving.
Thank you. Wes?
Last question, Sean, CBS. What is being done to prevent accidents like this happening again with temperatures dropping below freezing across the entire state?
So you mean tonight? So, I mean, I will take the first crack at it, and then especially have TxDOT respond to it. So listen, one thing that obviously happens whenever we have an ice storm like this and we have so much ice on the roads and maybe snow coming down, one is for TxDOT to be out in advance, preparing the roads as much as they possibly can, and then going back and continuing to prepare the roads. But extraordinarily important, and that is to continue to remind the public about the necessity of driving with greater caution. Many drivers will come across areas of the roadway where they think there is no problem whatsoever. However, it turns out that there is what's called black ice under them. Here's what's may happen in some parts of the state of Texas today. There will be parts of the state of Texas that get above freezing during the course
Add to that is in that location on Interstate 10, we have pre-treated that. We have treated it throughout the day yesterday. We're going to treat it again. But as the governor noted, with low temperatures, with stubborn ice spots, the roads are going to continue to be hazardous, and we really strongly encourage motorists to stay home wherever possible and to expect that you're going to hit icy conditions if you get out on the roads tonight.
Thank y'all very much.